welcome back to Kicks Over Coffee. It's Andy Pope with FTRA. There's been a lot going on in the world today. I'm not going to get into the political side. I am going to lean in a little bit to the environmental side and things that we're seeing. I just saw today that, water temperatures in Florida are at like their highest ever. They're over 100 degrees. And that is following up what we saw earlier in the spring about this huge kind of seaweed blob that was heading towards Florida. And I just think sometimes in our industry, we're very focused on carbon and carbon emissions, which is part of that problem. But what I'm really interested these days is spreading out the impacts that we look at of the footwear industry beyond just that. So soil's important, air's important, but equally our waterways and our water streams are important. And so I wanted to have on today Chuck Mason. He is the president and CEO of Bloom. I think some people may know Bloom Sustainable Materials. I think a lot of footwear companies increasingly are using Bloom in their product to displace traditional plastics. But Chuck, thanks for coming on today, number one. And then if I could just get you to share a refresher as to what Bloom Sustainable Materials are and what you're doing in the footwear industry.
Be happy to, Andy. First off, thanks FDRA and thanks Andy for having Bloom on today. We really appreciate it and appreciate working with you guys. And to the industry, thanks for giving us some of your time to hear what we've got to say today. And would love to give a quick refresher on who Bloom Sustainable Materials is and what we do and what Bloom Sustainable Materials are. I want to start it off. You've got it in the title here, Andy, but an overarching theme or something for people to take away from today's discussion. We're going to focus a lot of what we're presenting today around the idea of choose restorative. We're going to dig into that here a little bit of what is that or what do we really mean? And Andy, that was a great lead into it as well, of the importance of water, our global waterways, the state of those current waterways, and the necessity to do some repair and restoration to some of that. So some of that ties into what Bloom does, and happy to dive in here.
Yeah, great.
Actually, I want to lead off with one thing before I give this introduction, and people tune into these things, and if I could just put one key note out there at the very beginning of the discussion.
Good.
If there's one key message for the day or one key takeaway, choose restorative when it comes to making your sustainable materials and component choices. And what does this really mean? Find materials that restore, regenerate, or give back to the environment in some verifiable way. And how do you clearly and truly determine this? Require your suppliers to deliver to you an independent, third-party conducted, industry peer-reviewed life cycle assessment. It's the only way you're going to get there. Otherwise, all you're listening to are your suppliers' marketing messages without verification. So I want to put that out right up front because we're going to talk about a lot of stuff today, and some of it gets pretty deep and into some details. But if you take one thing away from today, hoping you can take that message home with you.
And I think the key part of that, what you're saying, is peer reviewed.
Independently conducted and peer reviewed. Yes. And we've gone over some of that in the past, and we've got other presentations out there on life cycle assessment. But quick refresher on Bloom. Who are we? Bloom Sustainable Materials. In a nutshell, we are low temperature biothermoplastics. So in the world of footwear, what does that mean? We're in EVA, rubber, TPR, TPE, all materials frequently found in the bottom unit of a pair of shoes in a variety of different ways or components. Outsoles, midsoles, insoles, just to name a few of those potential components. Bloom replaces significant quantities of petroleum-based virgin materials with biomass, and our biomass is waste material, so it is also recycled material. The primary biomass sources we use are algae and seaweed. And, people thinking about footwear or shoes, algae is not often the first thing you think of when you think of footwear materials, but we're trying to break some new ground here And so for people tuning in today, a little bit of detail or some interesting facts about algae. Maybe not everyone knows. Algae does a fantastic job of capturing carbon. It's a carbon sink. In fact, here's an unknown factoid for a lot of people. Algae captures more carbon and generates more oxygen than all of the forests on Earth combined. So most people shake their head like that and say, I have never. That is a true statement. You can go fact check me. And again, it's just one that not everybody knows. And so algae in the right amount, it's critical for the planet, it's critical for the environment. But just like most things, too much of something it can be a problem. And overabundant algae and seaweed are destructive and are a major problem. And so a lot of interesting things relating to algae. Bloom helps the world remove and repurpose overabundant waste algae, getting it out of the environment and out of places it doesn't need to be, and doing something useful with it. And again, a nutshell statement is algae captures carbon, Bloom captures algae. And so in effect, we capture a bunch of carbon and we put it into the bottom unit of a shoe. And that's pretty cool. A shoe becomes a carbon sink. And these things are verifiable, they're measurable, and we can help partners work towards carbon neutrality or even carbon negativity at the material level through using some of these materials. So we repurpose this waste algae and seaweed into other good uses. We prevent these waste materials from going to landfills, from rotting, decomposing, and contributing to other issues on the planet, releasing mass GHGs and other toxic gases. So instead of letting all that happen, we take these materials and we go do something useful with them.
Let me ask you,
sure.
Yeah, let me ask you in particular, because I think the restorative thing, like we know recycled, we talk about renewables. The restorative to some people is a new word, a new concept that people have to digest and think about. But in essence, what you're talking about here is in restorative is going out to a water source that has excess algae and might be damaging the ecosystem. And you guys clean that up and restore the water. So maybe is that the restorative part of what you're talking about?
That's a portion of it, Andy. Part of it can be cleaning up the waterways themselves, and other parts of it can be, when this excess or waste algae and seaweed decompose, they often release their nutrients right back into these environments that keeps feeding these overblooming or super blooming cycles. So by capturing and preventing the decomposition of that and release of those nutrients into those waterways, it also helps reduce the issue in the first place. So part of it's cleanup, and then part of it's removing nutrients.
I think it's interesting because when we think about impacts, we're always measuring like the negative impact, but Bloom is actually contributing to a positive impact when you're doing that, correct?
Exactly right. Exactly right. And again, it's a key message we'd love to share with our industry friends and contacts today is the life cycle assessments are really what give you the ability to measure in an apples to apples way the materials you're choosing, and at the end of their life cycle, the real measurable impacts they're having on the world or on the environment. Without that information, it is really hard. We're as an industry, we're all still really early on in this sustainability journey and truly learning together as an industry what really is sustainable and what isn't, and how do we get apples to apples comparisons, and people sitting in seats of having to make decisions of my material selection. And I'm trying, I think it's pretty unanimous across the footwear industry of we've got to do a better job as a whole of making more sustainable shoes. So you've got this great overarching statement, but then underneath that, it's how do we get there? And therein lies how early we are in the journey and how much there is still to learn, and how do we really measure and get good comparisons on the end impacts. Because from Bloom's point of view, that's all that really matters, is at the end of the life cycle, the real measurable impact of that product. Outside of that, we're in this world right now where there's a rush to sustainability. You got a lot of you've got a lot of players or industries or producers looking at this as potential business for them, trying to make a business out of it. But there's a lot of communication and a lot of marketing out there. But is there a lot of verification and data out there? And that's what we would urge people to look more carefully for.
Yeah, and I think at this point too, we've got other things around, I think what you're pointing to is there's a problem around just choosing a material that may have a specific more recycled content or more bio content, and you just think, well, that's the 5% or the 10% I need, and that's good, and I'll keep going. And sometimes people forget there's impacts to that could be greater than what we've been doing in the past. So we see some of that, for instance, with like leather, for example, with deforestation issues and things like that. And there's other examples where making some sustainable materials may have a greater energy impact or a greater emission or water impact than traditional practices. And I think that's where we're at, Chuck, is like people are getting frustrated because they're like, well, I did better. I chose a sustainable thing. And then someone saying, well, but if you verify it, it actually was worse because of the impact.
You're exactly right, Andy. And again, I think, Bloom stands by that 100%. To the best of our ability as an industry, verify it. Let's find mechanisms that help us measure, look at the data, and verify, versus just listening to somebody's marketing or messaging. And the life cycle assessment, again, when they're independently conducted and you have industry peers review them for validity, it's about as good as we can get right now in terms of giving us a good, useful tool as an industry.
Yeah, and I think the other part of the frustration is, to your point, there's not an overarching platform where you plug this in and you get a really good apples to apples result. And it's an easy button, right? It's that Staples easy button where you hit it and the answers are before you. I feel like companies really have to dig deep and get some wisdom in this space and make sure that they're having to do it themselves. I mean, I know there's HIG out there that's been used. There's some controversy with HIG, but the HIG's out there. There's other assessments and other tools, but it's still reliant, because I always say legally reliant on the company
Exactly
to
right.
verify it when they stick it out there, right? It's your own due diligence in this space. And I think there are some things that are moving around. And I think the more people get into this and know and start to demand something that simplifies it and aligns things, we'll get there. But there is a lot of frustration, I think, in that space.
Agree. And again, I describe it and Bloom describes it. We're pretty early on in that journey. There have been some attempts at frameworks and tools, a number of them, and there will be more. I think something to keep an eye on. We're engaged in, or we're involved in the CSRD effort in Europe, probably a little bit further ahead of North America in terms of putting some framework around this for business. Keep an eye on that in the next 1 to 2 years. I think that'll be a framework to keep an eye on and see if that starts taking the world in a direction of a more universal type framework and approach. But we'll see. Still pretty early in that process.
Is that like the EU kind of LCA tool they're looking at developing that measures biodiversity impacts and things like that?
It relates to LCA, and it's bringing together a lot of different things. It's led by the European Union, and it is, they've put out some declarations of things they are specifically looking for in terms of, again, real verifiable impacts on the environment. And they want to build tools and structures around the real data driven side of that. So look for more there. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that develops. It may take it a while before that really, they're aiming at bigger businesses and bigger industry first, but at some point it's going to come to footwear, and it will come to footwear and fashion and other areas that are closer to what we do here.
We've been talking about restoration. I think about car restoration, right? But in the shoe industry, on the restoration side, you guys actually, and I'll toot your horn for you and you can tell me what it means, but you were recognized by the United Nations earlier this year and you were recognized, you were named an actor in the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, and featured on their website with some other companies. Maybe tell me how that came about, what that means to you guys when you're doing the work as a purpose-led organization.
Well, thanks for recognizing that, Andy, and we're really proud. We were named by the United Nations a couple of months ago as an actor in the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And what the United Nations is doing here is, looking for businesses that, again, it comes back to this idea of making real measurable impacts, positive impacts on the environment in the way of restoration. Right now there are a lot of companies and a lot of decision makers out there first starting with, hey, how do we just reduce our own footprint or reduce our own negative impact before they even get to the idea of how do we positively regenerate or restore. But I think it's important for industries and companies and brands out there to know there are some players out there who are finding a way to get forward on this and get into actual measurable restoration of aspects of our environment. And we are one of those actors. We participated in a process with the United Nations where they review what we do, looked at our life cycle assessment, reviewed all the information in our processes and our approach, and put their stamp on it to say, yeah, you guys are doing the right thing. You're helping restore these areas of the environment, and we recognize you for that. And we're going to help promote what you're doing there as part of this website for the Decade on Ecosystem Restoration.
That's awesome. And I should say, kind of starting the conversation around water at our sustainability summit this September in Portland. Hopefully people will attend. You can go to choosesustainabilitysummit.com and learn more about that and see the agenda. But Bloom will be presenting on water impacts and issues around that. Last year we had a great discussion around soil. We have a different discussion on soil this year from an actual farmer coming to talk about actually the practice of soil regeneration. And in the same way, Bloom's going to talk about water impacts and again, go deeper on these topics. So I hope you guys can attend that. Last year we had like 175 folks, super energy filled. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of information. It was a lot of networking. It was very encouraging. I think people, we talked a little bit about the frustration, Chuck, but I think people got encouraged that people aren't alone in this and we can keep working together around these things and keep choosing better materials that are verified, just like we talked about today. The verification is critically important. Before I let you go, this is Kicks Over Coffee. You guys are based in the South, Mississippi, yeah?
That's correct. Our plant and a good number of our team are based in Meridian, Mississippi. That's correct.
All right. You got any good coffee down there? Any local roasters, or you just stick to Starbucks or what?
There's some decent coffee down there. I couldn't function without it. So I've got to find a good cup when I'm in town there in Meridian. We're a pretty decentralized organization. A good number of our teams in Meridian, but we've got team members in Boston, Colorado, California, Switzerland, Italy, China, and we're usually able to find pretty good cups of coffee whenever we're meeting with our teams in those areas. So we're fortunate.
Well, I always give these free tips out. They're typically crazy, but a good way to build culture is a coffee competition. Who can brew the best cup, right? So
there you go.
So, and folks out there can do the same, because I know everybody's working from different places these days, and there's a lot of flexibility, but I believe coffee can bring us together just like Kicks can. So, and that's why we do these shows, Kicks Over Coffee, casual conversations about the footwear industry. And Chuck, appreciate you coming on and support you guys have given FDRA, and look forward to seeing you in September and hearing more about water issues, impact, and restoring our environment. I think is a critical conversation and something that is actually super cool to be talking about, something super positive as an industry.
Yes, we'll be happy to go into more detail there at the Sustainability Summit. And a lot of this gets pretty deep and pretty technical, but important to share it with the industry and with the decision makers out there and help them understand this landscape a little further, the importance of water, the importance of water impacts, the importance of water restoration. Some of these things rank as some of the highest things on the UN's Sustainable Development Goals globally. 7 out of the 17 development goals focus on areas that Bloom has a positive impact on. Some other things we'll go into. The IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, ranks freshwater ecosystem destruction among the top feedback mechanisms for climate change. So just coming back to where you started, Andy, these things are all really important. We're going to get into them a little more at the Sustainability Summit, and happy to at least offer a teaser here with Kicks Over Coffee.
Awesome. Thanks again, Chuck. And folks, as always, appreciate you joining. Make sure you go back to the catalog and listen to other conversations we're hearing about sustainability, about supply chains, about other things impacting the industry. Appreciate you joining us for this time. And until next time, keep wearing kicks, keep drinking coffee.
Thanks, Andy. We'll see you soon.